ಹೊಸ ಕ್ರಾಂಪ್ಟನ್ ವಾಟರ್ ಹೀಟರ್ ಕಸ್ಟಮೈಸ್ಡ್ ಬೇಕಿಂಗ್
Also pay
ನೋಟ್ಸ್
heed to the
ಇದು
immense
ನೀಡುತ್ತೆ
suffering of
ಪರ್ಫೆಕ್ಟ್ ಹಾಟ್
innocent
ವಾಟರ್
Palestinian civilians.
Andre
The lives of
perfect
Palestinian
hot water.
people are as precious as those of
auto
all other
booking
people.
guarantee with fewer
Thousands of
drives.
Palestinian
Coming
civilians,
cancellation
including hundreds of children, have been killed by Israel's air barrage against Hamas.
Did you know that it is
Critical
also
civilian
eco-friendly?
infrastructure is being destroyed. UN agencies on the ground are warning of a calamitous humanitarian situation in Gaza. We offer our deepest condolences to the affected families and all of Gaza and the West Bank. We also extend our condolences to the families and colleagues of humanitarian workers who have lost their lives in the line of duty, including the 38 UN staff members who have perished recently in Gaza. Kenya thanks the United Nations, the Secretary General in particular, Egypt, Jordan, and other parties for the opening of the Rafah border crossing, but it is inadequate. It is imperative that Israel and neighboring states unite to guarantee unhindered humanitarian aid and delivery of vital services at the scale needed. We call for Israel's military to take every precaution to protect civilians and critical civilian infrastructure from its military strikes. We strongly condemn Hamas's tactic of hiding weapons in civilian areas. Using human shields is abhorrent and illegal. These actions violate the fundamental values and laws upheld by the UN, highlighting the urgent need for a global resolution to the Palestinian question. Mr. President, history teaches us that the response of states to terrorism, particularly when they make use of illegal means, can unintentionally lead us to an era of escalated radicalization and violence. Much has been said about the 7th October attacks being Israel's 9/11. All of us can empathize with the desire for vengeance after the cruelties of terrorism have been visited on the innocent. Yet we must be wise enough to remember the terribly costly lessons learned from the worldwide responses to the Al-Qaeda attacks here in New York 2 decades ago. We therefore strongly urge Israel to adhere to international humanitarian law and the laws of war today so that it can maintain the legitimate opportunity to negotiate peace tomorrow. The desire of the Palestinian people for their own land can never be extinguished. However, as long as Palestinians grow up in rage because their lives, dignity, and talents are distorted by a punishing occupation, their just cause will struggle to be led by a legitimate resistance that rejects terrorism. The attacks of 7th October and the aftermath in Gaza signal a pivotal moment. The status quo is no more. 2 paths lie ahead: an escalating conflict with global repercussions, or a renewed international commitment to a 2-state solution and peaceful coexistence based on a credible, non-partisan, and impartial process. This is the moment for courageous, inspired leadership that can keep its eye on the prospect for peace. Such leadership must desist from using the grave situation in Gaza to advance short-term geostrategic advantage or mobilize domestic constituencies, for to do so constitutes a betrayal to the Palestinian cause and an insult to Israeli and Palestinian lives lost. States that ardently support and sponsor both factions of this monumental conflict bear the responsibility to employ their influence and leverage in guiding the parties back to the negotiating table. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Kenya. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Colombia.
Gracias.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. As was expressed by the Vice Minister of Multilateral Affairs of Colombia yesterday, Colombia reaffirms its historic support for a peaceful solution, a definitive and comprehensive solution to the Palestinian question, based on the solution of 2 states who live side by side within safe borders in accordance with what is established in the relevant resolutions of this General Assembly and of the Security Council. Colombia voted in favor of this resolution, joining the broad majority that agreed in reaffirming the call for a ceasefire and for the unlimited respect for international humanitarian law and the protection of life in accordance with the
Poor quality interiors haunting you. Try Live Space. Get quality interiors for your home.
violence and
Live
more
space, your
loss of
space.
life, leaving in its wake an unfortunate and nefarious legacy for future generations. I reiterate the appeal made by President Gustavo Petro to hold an international peace conference with a view to achieving a definitive solution to this conflict. Thank you very much.
I thank the distinguished representative of Colombia. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of South Africa.
Thank you, Mr. President. South Africa voted yes in favor of Resolution L25 on protection of civilians and upholding legal and humanitarian obligations. Like many here in this hall today, we are deeply disturbed by the harrowing images of death, destruction, and turmoil which have engulfed Gaza as a result of Israeli bombardment of civilians, essential infrastructure, and places of worship. As the international community, we must be united in calling for an immediate, comprehensive ceasefire. Humanitarian corridors should be opened immediately so that aid and other basic services can reach all those in need. We call on parties, all parties, to exercise restraint and for all states to desist from fueling this increasingly unjust war, including by supplying weapons to the parties. South Africa urges the United Nations to impose an arms embargo on all parties involved in this conflict, given the nature of the death and destruction we are witnessing every day. We also strongly support the Secretary General's call for international humanitarian law to be upheld, civilians to be protected, and for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire, as well as upholding human dignity. Mr. President, we express condolences to the people of Palestine and Israel for the loss of lives during the past 3 weeks. There's an added obligation on Israel as an occupying power over the people and territory it occupies in terms of the Geneva Conventions, including the prohibition against collective punishment. This is the international system based on respect for the rule of international law and international humanitarian law that many in this assembly have been arguing for. The targeting of civilians in armed conflicts, including the use of starvation, destruction of civilian infrastructure, and all other atrocities perpetuated by the occupying power, including calling for the wiping out of a group of people, clearly constitute war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. These are clear violations of international human rights, international humanitarian law, and the Geneva Conventions and their protocols. These violations must be investigated by the relevant international courts at our disposal. Mr. President, we cannot ignore the fact that continued occupation of Palestine by Israel breeds hatred, suffering, and pain. We must not proclaim the importance of international law and the importance of the UN Charter in some situations and not in others, as if the rule of law only applies to a select few. For international law to be credible, it should be uniformly applied and not selective. It is therefore unfortunate that the conflict has again showed the inadequacy of our institutions, in particular the UN Security Council, which has a mandate derived from the UN Charter for the maintenance of international peace and security. A body of such stature is found desperately wanting, as it cannot even call for a humanitarian ceasefire to allow for much needed humanitarian supplies to go to those that need it most. We are deeply concerned by the events in the Security Council in recent days, which have demonstrated the aggravated politicization of a dire humanitarian situation during a time of need and desperation. This should be another wake-up call to all of us to work urgently for the reform of this body. South Africa wishes to join others who have affirmed that the ultimate solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is the establishment of two states, Palestine and Israel, living side by side in peace. The Palestinian state should be created along the 1967 borders, with East Jerusalem as its capital. We have the responsibility as the international community to make every effort towards creating opportunities for comprehensive dialogue led and owned by Palestinians and Israelis themselves. Peace between Palestine and Israel cannot be delayed any longer. We would like to conclude by correcting an incorrect interpretation of the laws of war in situations of occupation. Occupation law is part of the laws of armed conflict. A state cannot simultaneously exercise control over the territory it occupies and militarily attack that territory on the claim that it is foreign and poses an exogenous national security threat. The occupying power can use tools applicable to the rule of law, including policing powers to deal with criminal actions. These notions of the right to defend itself has been used erroneously and deliberately to justify extrajudicial killings and collective punishment, with many countries enabling and justifying these unlawful acts. At the same time, we condemn the attacks by Hamas and other Palestinian groups on Israeli civilians. While oppressed and occupied people have the right to resist, including armed resistance, this right has to be exercised within limits imposed by the laws of war. The actions of Hamas since 7 October this year included war crimes and must be investigated, just as the heinous war crimes, crimes against humanity and genocide perpetrated by the Israeli forces must be investigated. In all these cases, the most responsible must be held accountable, and we call on the International Criminal Court to immediately indicate its plans to investigate these latest breaches of international crimes in Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories. Mr. President, while we are referencing the relevant laws of war provisions, we believe that war is a scourge. As the organization created to save succeeding generations from this scourge of war, we should change the global culture of violence to a culture where peace is valued, where peaceful societies are nurtured and peace builders are venerated, instead of warmongers and their related institutions and actors. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of South Africa. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Italy.
Mr. President, let me first thank the PGA Francis for chairing this emergency special session. I would like to begin by joining colleagues who have thanked the United Nations for their tireless work to de-escalate the conflict and help the affected populations on the ground. It is extremely important that in the face of the stalemate in the Security Council, the main body of the United Nations could serve as a multilateral forum of discussion on the most pressing issue of today, namely the conflict that has been inflaming the Middle East since the horrific terrorist attacks against Israel that were launched by Hamas on October the 7th. Italy is and will be firmly standing in solidarity with Israel. For us, Israeli security is in no way negotiable. This is what Italian government at the highest level, from our Prime Minister to our Foreign Minister, has been stating all along. But we also said that we should avoid to fall into the trap of those terrorists, those responsible for the attacks on October the 7th, that would like to turn the Middle East into an area of clash of civilizations, religions and cultures. We will not allow that. While stating our full solidarity with Israel, we will continue to be engaged as Italy in our active, intense diplomacy aimed at building bridges with the moderate Arab states, with our friends and partners, including the PA, in the attempt to build a peaceful environment in the region based on mutual respect and mutual recognition. Italy abstained in the draft resolution that was adopted today. By recognizing the efforts on the part of our Arab partners who put the resolutions forward, the improvements that they have accepted to include in the text have been unfortunately not enough for us to support the draft. Three important elements were missing. First, an unequivocal condemnation in the strongest terms and without any ambiguity of the heinous attacks by Hamas of October 7th against innocent Israeli civilians. Second, it was missing the recognition of the legitimate right of self-defense of any state, of Israel in this case, under attack. Exercise of the right of self-defense that should obviously be fully compliant with international law and international humanitarian law. And finally, the resolution did not mention in explicit, unambiguous terms the humanitarian imperative to release immediately and unconditionally all the hostages taken on October 7th and to treat them humanely. So we could not support the resolution because of these three elements missing. While the conflict is ongoing, our priority is to display all the possible diplomatic efforts to allow the safe and unimpeded passage of aid while firmly demanding the immediate and conditional release of all hostages without preconditions. We need also to intensify our common efforts to avoid the conflict to spill over beyond Gaza. The consequence of an expansion of the conflict would be unimaginable for the region and for the entire world. The only way to avoid such dangerous prospect is to promote the resumption of a political initiative for a concrete, structural, long-term solution with a precisely defined timeline based on two peoples, two states perspective. The Palestinian people must have the right to be a self-governing nation in freedom alongside a state of Israel to which the full right to existence and security must be unequivocally and unambiguously recognized. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Italy. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Portugal.
Thank you, Mr. President. As the situation is raging and risks spiraling throughout the region, we are deeply disappointed that the use of veto has so far hindered the Security Council from addressing the situation in Israel and Gaza, and we welcome the General Assembly resolutions adopted today. Once again, Portugal would like to reiterate its unequivocal condemnation of the terrorist attacks by Hamas, reaffirm its solidarity with Israel, and the recognitions of Israel's right of self-defense. Terrorism in all its forms should be condemned, and hostages must be released immediately and without preconditions. No matter the savagery of the worst terrorist attacks on its history, Israel's action must respect international humanitarian law. No party to an armed conflict is above international humanitarian law. Tragically, civilian population, hospitals, UN facilities, including schools and other critical and civilian infrastructures, are not being protected. The death toll on both sides is staggering. We cannot remain indifferent to the suffering of innocent victims, Israelis, Palestinians, and other nationalities, including UN workers. At this moment, our collective priority should be the protection of civilians and addressing the tragic humanitarian situation on the ground. Portugal fully supports the Secretary General call for a humanitarian ceasefire and commend its tireless advocacy for humanitarian corridors so that aid can reach the population of Gaza. And the UN work on the ground and pay our respect to those who died in the service of UNRWA. Mr. President, we also consider it is crucial to avoid the spread of the conflict to the West Bank and beyond by accident or calculated action. We welcome and encourage the continuation of regional and international efforts, both in multilateral and bilateral spheres, to prevent a spillover. And we must return to the diplomatic track. To break the cycle of violence and extremism, we must transform this moment and crisis into a moment of peace in the future, both for Israelis and Palestinians, and do our utmost to preventing that anger and confrontation prevails. It is our collective responsibility to address the structural drivers of this conflict. This will require a renewed involvement of all relevant actors and a determined effort to implement the Security Council resolutions on the matter and set a clear and solid path to a Palestinian state fulfilling the two-state solutions. Mr. President, despite the efforts made by the co-sponsors, which we recognize, the General Assembly resolution adopted fails to condemn the appalling terrorist attack of October 7 by Hamas and the taking of hostages. We deeply regret this. Acts of terrorism are criminal and unjustifiable regardless of their motivations, whenever and by whomever they are committed. Hostage-taking constitutes a serious violation of the Geneva Convention and a war crime under international law, criminal law. This is the reason why we voted in favor of the Canadian amendment and regret that it was not approved. Mr. President, in the aftermath of Hamas' horrific attack, we shared the grief of Israeli families and we declared our solidarity with Israeli people. The same humanity and belief in the inherent value of every human life takes us also to support the Palestinian people, acknowledging their suffering and the catastrophic reality in Gaza. This human tragedy unfolding before our eyes must be stopped now. No matter what, a humanitarian truth must be established immediately, and all parts must comply by their obligations under international law, including international humanitarian law and human rights law. This is the reason why Portugal voted in favor of the resolution, because our common humanity must prevail. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Portugal. We have heard the last speaker in explanations of vote after the vote. I give the floor to the distinguished observer of the observer state of Palestine.
Mr. President, State of Palestine Mr. President, distinguished delegates, today, here in the General Assembly, in the world's parliament, countries of principle and conscience, peace-loving nations stood up and proved that the international community has not forsaken humanity, has not forfeited international law as the universal rules they apply to all, has not forsaken the promise, the purposes and principles of the United Nations, and has not abandoned the Palestinian people in these darkest hours, nor forsaken their just cause for freedom and justice. We are grateful to all the countries that voted in support of the draft resolution tabled by Jordan and co-sponsored by 46 countries, expressing by an overwhelming majority support for this unequivocal call for an immediate humanitarian truce, for a halt to all attacks on civilians, for the protection of civilians, for compliance with international law, including humanitarian and human rights law, including the release of all civilians held captive, and has called for immediate and unimpeded humanitarian assistance that is so desperately needed by our people in the Gaza Strip, where Israel not only continues its aggression, but is escalating its indiscriminate and savage attacks on innocent Palestinian children, women, men, as we speak. The occupying power has launched its ground invasion in the darkest of Gaza, where it has cut electricity, internet, and all communications. And yet, here, there are still some who refuse to equally and unequivocally condemn these war crimes and crimes against humanity being perpetrated by Israel. But today, we will not focus on such a regrettable stance. We will focus on the unequivocal message this August Assembly has sent to our people that the overwhelming majority of the people of the world stand with you, stand with the people in the Gaza Strip. They bear witness to your suffering. They feel your pain, and they have not forgotten you and will not forsake you. So we express our sincere appreciation to our sisters and brothers in the Arab group under the leadership of Jordan, our sisters and brothers in the OIC under the leadership of Mauritania, for their unwavering solidarity and efforts to ensure the adoption of this important and principled resolution. Of this vital resolution, as the Security Council regrettably remains deadlocked, failing to uphold its charter duty to maintain international peace and security. And we thank all our sisters and brothers, yes, sisters and brothers from every region of the world for their principled support in favor of the resolution on protection of civilians and upholding legal and humanitarian obligations. That is the true aim of this resolution. We are one in seeking an end to the killing, the trauma and terror, the destruction. This, of course, is not something that the representative of the occupying power will ever understand. He still comes here to this world body after it has clearly spoken and said, enough bullying and inciting, trying to force everyone to accept their twisted criminal definition of the self-defense, i.e. to massacre civilians and destroy a people. There is no such right in this world, not legally, not politically, not morally. There will never be. This is the message that was sent today by the General Assembly to him and anyone else who is attempting to rewrite international law, including the laws meant to protect civilians, including those occupied and oppressed, blockaded and besieged and persecuted for so long. This is the reality of the Palestinian people. This is the reality that we appeal to you to not lose sight of and to act now to give meaning to the resolution adopted today with immediate practical efforts to secure a humanitarian truce that will lead to a cessation of hostilities and that will secure to our suffering people in Gaza the humanitarian aid. It is a catastrophic situation that requires immediate action. Work now together to save civilian lives. It is deplorable, inhumane, unforgettable that over 7,000 Palestinians in Gaza have been killed by Israel. Among them, over than 3,500 children. This is a crime against humanity. The world cannot stand by and watch as more innocent civilian lives are taken. In these grave hours, as Israel has launched today its ground invasion of Gaza, we cannot hesitate to act together, swiftly and responsibly, to bring an end to this criminal and barbaric Israeli aggression. Listen to the Secretary General. This is a moment of truth. Listen to the Commissioner General of UNRWA, who has lost over 50 staff members in this aggression. Gaza is becoming the graveyard of a population trapped between war, siege, and deprivation. That's what the Commissioner General of UNRWA stated. Do not let this happen. You have to stop it. We have to stop it. All of us. Listen to the cries of Palestinian mothers and fathers and children calling for an end to their oppression. Listen to the billions of people around the world calling for an end to this injustice. Listen to the millions in the streets call for humanity to prevail. Listen to every single country in our region and so many around the world who have taken principled positions here. Listen to your conscience. And if that is not enough, listen to those who warn you about where this will lead if not stopped. Lastly, Mr. President, we must act now to support the courageous service of the humanitarian workers on the ground, the staff of UNRWA, OCHA, UNICEF, WFP, and other UN agencies, as well as the ICRC and our own Palestinian Red Crescent, and Palestinian doctors, nurses, and medics working round the clock to save lives. We pay special tribute to the Palestinian National Staff of UNRWA and other humanitarian agencies working to care for their brothers and sisters, and to our journalists insisting to tell the world the truth of what is happening in Gaza and all over Palestine. Even though their lives are also directly threatened and targeted by the Israeli aggression, they insist to choose life over death. That is the Palestinian ethos that carries us through even in these darkest of times. We want life now, justice now, freedom now. We want peace now. Enough is enough. And also I want to give special thanks and tribute to the principled, humane, and passionate position of our President, the President of the General Assembly, who have conducted our deliberation with humanity, with principles, with professionalism. We give him our salutation and gratitude. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished observer of the Observer State of Palestine. We have heard the last speaker for this meeting. We shall hear the remaining speakers on Tuesday, 31st of October, at 3 p.m. in this hall. The meeting is adjourned.
Кривавий та жорстокий шлях. Я прошу, зупиніть війну. Остановите войну. Please stop the war.
There's been such an outpouring of voices in support of people in Ukraine and what they've been going through, for those in bombardments, for those who are fleeing, for those who are farewelling family members amid this conflict. But there's also been people putting their hands in their pocket. This is emergency life-saving equipment. This is surgical supply. These are things doctors need who are working in basements right now. These are resuscitation kits. These are first aid kits. These are things that will help us save the lives of children here in Ukraine amid this conflict. And they're here, they're in Ukraine, and they're going to hospitals because of you, because of your support to UNICEF. Thank you. Thank you so very much.
Ne mogu ni da verujem da sam mislila da sve moram sama i trudila sam se da sve radim sama.
Trudim se da budem što više uz njega, trudim se da budem što više uz Aleksandru, znači da pomažem u bilo kom smislu.
Velika dobrobit za njihov odnos. Ona je više fokusirana na igru sa detetom, ima strpljenja, zadovoljnija je sobom.
Ako brinemo o roditeljima, brinemo i o deci. Kroz ovaj program ja roditeljima nudim konkretne alate, da pronađu sopstvene snage, da se na njih oslone, da pronađu osobe od poverenja i prijatelje, a onda naravno i u zajednici, i da nekako prevaziđu sve te situacije koje mogu da budu potencijalno stresne.
Niko ti ne kaže da u stvari sa drugim detetom to je totalno nešto drugačije. Da opet možeš da učiš kako da postaneš mama.
Nije imala vreme ni da se odmori, ni da se posveti sebi, tako da sam sa njom prošla takođe dnevne aktivnosti.
Njoj se posebno svidelo to što smo zajedno, na primjer, pravile rasporede, pošto je bio u vidu slika, da crta, da seče papir. Tu smo provele vreme zajedno na jedan kreativan način, a plus je meni omogućilo kad se zasiti da ima malo slobodnog vremena.
Mislim da se najčešće naša igra svodi na praćenje. Ona ide, ja pratim. Da dijete stvori svoje osjećaje za dobro, loše, opasno.
Fokus na roditelje je jedan novi fokus u našem poslu. Mislim da je jako važno, s obzirom da su roditelji prvi i najvažniji učitelji za ceo život svoje deci, da budu osnaženi i dobiju podršku.
Dan mi počinje tako što vidim njen osmeh i ja se raspoložim, promenimo joj pelene i onda kreće žurka.
Nekad to nisu igračke, nekad je to kašika obična koju koristim u domaćinstvu. Kad slažem veš, ona obavezno bude oko mene.
Savez koji su oni zajednički stvorili treba da bude primjer svima, da mama treba da ima vreme za sebe, tata treba da ima vreme za sebe i da imaju zajedničko vreme sa detetom.
Zajedničkim snagama prolazim kroz sve i želimo da je zajedno učimo svemu.
أول شغلة خسرت أبوي، بعدين خسرت دراستي 3 سنين، وخسرت بيتنا كنا قاعدين بيه، يعني كنا قاعدين مبسوطين. الطريق كان كتير صعب وشوك وشرطان وكنا كتير خايفين. كل ما نمشي خطوتين نقول المهرب انبطحوا. حبيبتي ما تقدر ترد تنبطح، ترد توقف، وداخت ووقعت وقالت روح عفوني اموت. قلنا لا، يا نموت كلنا سوا يا نعيش كلنا سوا. هي راح أبوي، صارنا 6 سنين قاعدين بالخيمة، ظلت نقط علينا مي. أنا المدرسة هي حياتي وأنا بحبها كتير وأتعلم بيها وأقرأ وألعب مع رفقاتي، والشي اللي ما بعرفه رفقاتي علمني إياه، واللي ما يعرف إنه يعلمهن إياه. علمونا على الألغام وعلى الأخطار ورفيق، حتى بالحرب خسرت رفيقتي أسماء، وعمل ما راحت على المساحة وما سمعت كلمة المساحة، راحت فكرت هي القنبلة طابة شلتها طبتها على الأرض وإنها متفجرة بيها وإنها ميتة.
که سوله راغله څومره ښکلې زندګي به کوو، که سوله راغله څومره ښکلې زندګي به کوو، څوک به نښتر څوک به چنار ږدو زیبایي به کوو، له دې سپېرو دښتو به بیرته شنه باغونه جوړ کړو، له دې سپېرو دښتو به بیرته شنه باغونه جوړ کړو، خپلو پټو ته به ستنېږو بزګري به کوو. زما د وطن د هر بچي به بیا قلم په لاس وي، زما د وطن د هر بچي به بیا قلم په لاس وي، علم پرور به وو په ټولو پاچایي به کوو. مونږه د امن سولې تږي، مونږه له جنګ ستړي، مونږ به په یوه ټغر ټولېږو ورورګلوي به کوو. بیا به غوټۍ لکه د ګل زلمي کفن کې نه وي، بیا به غوټۍ لکه د ګل زلمي کفن کې نه وي، بیا به واسکټ اخلو په یو رنګ کې کالي به کوو. نن ښوونځي کې یو بې پلاره ماشوم داسې ویل، نن ښوونځي کې یو بې پلاره ماشوم داسې ویل، که سوله راشي مونږ په هر ډګر سیالي به کوو. زه له کاروان سره یو ځای ځم د سیند غاړې ته، زه له کاروان سره یو ځای ځم د سیند غاړې ته، جوړه جوړه اخلو انځور خو لږ شوخي به کوو، جوړه جوړه اخلو انځور خو لږ شوخي به کوو.
Let's turn trash into cash.
My name is Nzambi Mate. I'm the founder of Jijenge Makers Limited, and we convert plastic waste into building products. Plastic waste is not just a Kenya problem, but it's a worldwide problem. And here in Nairobi, we generate about 500 metric tons of plastic waste every single day, and only a fraction of that is recycled. We decided, what more can we do instead of just sitting in the sidelines and complaining? Essentially, companies have to pay to dispose the waste. So we solve their problem. The waste essentially comes for free. This is the plastic waste we get from factories. With this, we mix with sand, as the plastic is like the binder. We have 3 machines. The extruder does the mixing of plastic waste with sand at very high temperatures, and then the press compresses it. Plastic is fibrous in nature, and so therefore the brick ends up having a stronger compression strength. Does that look like waste to you? It's almost half the weight, so therefore during transportation and installation it's faster in terms of cost implication. We right now have a capacity of producing 1,000 to 1,500 bricks a day. So far we have recycled 20 metric tons, and we are looking to push that value to 50 by the end of next financial year. Winning the Young Champions of the Earth award is a huge motivation booster for us as a team. It's been a long 3-year journey, and so this was like someone saying, I see what you're doing and I appreciate that. And with this platform, we're looking to see how we can get on board partners to scale this solution, not just in Kenya, but all over Africa, just to start. And in addition to that, be able to impact and motivate other people and other youths to do similar things in different places. So right now we are just making paving blocks, but we now want to make actual building blocks. As I like saying, you have to be true to your why. Why are you doing this? What is the motivation behind it? For me, I was just tired of being in the sidelines of seeing plastic. I ideally jumped in off a cliff without even a parachute. I was building it as I was falling down. But isn't that how great things are done? So act for nature.
Le sang dans mes veines coule, parcourant mon cœur qui lui fait battre d'espoir. Je suis une plume, dans le souhait de toucher chaque cœur et l'illuminer de joie, de par ma foi, de vivre dans un monde de solidarité. Je suis cette âme assoiffée des mondes sans amalgame, un monde d'apprentissage où chaque échec est synonyme de prise de courage. Je refuse de croire au désespoir, mais de voir l'histoire d'une vie dans laquelle le meilleur nous attend, malgré les larmes. Le cœur qui s'enflamme, l'âme qui s'affaiblit, l'espoir qui se ternit. La vie est une preuve d'espoir, car sans elle, elle n'existe tout simplement pas.
Welcome to Global 3000. Life begins at 70. We find out why many older people in Japan are shunning the idea of retirement. Waste disposal in South Africa. We learn how a small startup is moving mountains when it comes to recycling. But first we go to the rainforests of Brazil, where illegal gold mining leads to deforestation and the destruction of natural habitats. Gold is one of the most valuable precious metals on Earth, and also one of the most desirable, whether as jewellery, as a commodity, or as an investment. The gold price has been rising for years. It's seen as a safe asset during periods of economic uncertainty, like now with the coronavirus pandemic. Recently, the gold price hit €1,500 for a troy ounce. But how much gold is there on our planet? The World Gold Council estimates that the total amount of mined gold would fill a cube with nearly 22-metre-long sides. Almost half of it has been turned into jewellery. 22% is private investments, while 17% is held by central banks. The remainder is found in electronic devices like smartphones. It's not known exactly how much gold is still hidden in the earth, though one thing is certain, mining it is becoming an increasingly complex task. Most continents can boast large-scale gold deposits, including South America. In Brazil, gold mining is having a devastating impact on both the rainforests and the people. There's no let-up for Chief Juarez Saul Munduruku. Despite the pandemic and rainy season downpours, he's out surveying his territory. More and more often, he comes across illegal gold mining rafts. Their crews are probably armed, so Chief Juarez simply notes their location.
They pollute our water. It's mostly undrinkable now. There's a film of oil on it, and the mercury they use sinks to the riverbed. We consume it through the fish we eat, and it makes us sick.
His territory is this forest, a protected nature reserve. The illegal loggers and gold miners who increasingly encroach on the Munduruku indigenous people's land don't care about that. Chief Juarez suspects it's because the price of gold has shot up during the pandemic. Intruders have cut this new path through the jungle. They start by logging the valuable trees, then they plow up the soil looking for gold. Chief Juarez is worried.
This year we've increased our patrols because we can see there are more intruders. It's dangerous for us because the pandemic means we're forced to take over the work of the environmental police, even though it puts our lives at risk.
Gold prospectors are never far away. Some prospect legally outside the nature reserve. Others invade indigenous territory because there are hardly any patrols there at the moment. In Chief Juarez's village, the Munduruku maintain their culture and traditions. Their lives revolve around the river. As they have done for centuries. But they also maintain ties with the rest of the world. They own cell phones, have a public school, and are in regular contact with environmental organizations. The Munduruku have so far withstood the appeal of the gold rush, unlike most other people in the region.
In the city, all the gold miners are in on the game. The mayor, the councillors, and even the senator. That's what makes them so powerful. The mayor is also a logger and a gold miner.
As we leave the village, we pass more gold mining rafts. And some rapids. A dam is scheduled to be built here, another threat to the indigenous way of life. 3 hours along the river, and we're in a different world. The provincial capital, Itaituba, has been the epicenter of the gold rush here for 50 years. It's thriving despite the pandemic. Prosperity based on the high price of gold. Itaituba's mayor says that's why there's hardly any unemployment here, despite the coronavirus crisis. He's currently doing his official work from home. Privately, he runs a network of companies, including gold mines.
The Bolsonaro government has to regulate our gold mines, so people don't have to work illegally anymore. Only legal mines can be properly regulated. Anything else drives the miners into illegality with no rights. It can't go on like this.
The mayor says the mercury pollution isn't a serious problem.
I've been mining gold since I was 18. I've recovered 3 tons of gold since then. Mercury has never affected me in all that time. And there's no technology which could replace the use of mercury.
the country's capital, Brasilia, President Jair Bolsonaro is the main supporter of Itaituba's gold miners. He reassured one delegation that he was working to allow mining even in indigenous territories. He's already drastically pared back environmental policing and penalties. Wesley Tomás was a delegation member. He's been lobbying to legalize the gold mines for years. Thousands of them are about to be licensed retrospectively. For now, only those outside protected indigenous territories. Wesley Tomás says it's progress.
Ele fala muita besteira, mas...
Sure, Bolsonaro talks a load of rubbish, but he also does some good things. We visited him 7 times in Brasilia, and we'll soon see a load of gold mines legalized at last.
Tudo que a gente precisava para legalizar o garimpeiro.
He shows us some pictures of his licensed gold mines outside protected areas and says the gaps they left in the jungle will be reforested.